Hi, this is Miss Deegan, and I'm recording this as your Wednesday lecture that really goes with the assignment number 3 on organization, or what I call formal writing. Before you begin doing this assignment, if you haven't finished it already, I'd like you to go to your goals and just consider what's there. Those goals, especially the ones I've given you, 1 and 2, are going to be really directly related to how you achieve this piece of formal writing every time. So what you could already start to do is take the goals and keep them in mind as you write, or even write them before your piece and have them right in front of you. So for example, if one of the goals that you have from me is avoid ly adverbs, try to find a different way to make your point. As you write this formal piece, have that in your thoughts. We'll do this more formally, but for today and this week, I'm asking you to begin considering that. It will only help. But the assignment is to consider in Good Country People our main character, Joy, Hulga. I'm asking you to make a definitive claim on whether or not you think she changes. There are lots of different ways to answer this question, and I'm going to try to model that for you. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to make an opinion-based statement or a claim on what you think. Write a formal 5 to 10 sentence analysis paragraph about Good Country People. Make a 1-sentence claim about whether Joy, Hulga, changes or does not change over the course of the story, and then support your claim with evidence. So that's what we're doing. I want to present on some things that might help in general. So the key takeaways that I'd like you to walk away today with are reviewing claims and evidence, looking at quotes and trying to integrate those quotes, and then imagining how you can begin transitioning between sentences within a paragraph to get to the final expression of your idea. So 3 things. I want to pause here and give credit to Brian Stabnick, who does a lot of the videos on AP Classroom for AP Literature, because I really like the way he thinks about claim writing. So a lot of this is borrowed from him. All right, so as you try to figure out what you're going to do, the first step is planning, or you might think of it as just thinking, depending on how you approach these things. I think for some students, they can collect these ideas in their mind, and that is thinking. Planning is just putting that thinking down a little bit more concretely. So that's what I'm going to do here. When planning, search through the text for interesting moments and your corresponding micro ideas. So what interests you in this story? And what interests you specifically around the prompt, the question of whether or not Joy changes? What begins to help you answer this question? There are so many different types of ideas that you could use to answer this question of her transformation or lack of transformation. For me, as I thought about that idea, and I'll begin to model now how I go about crafting my paragraph, I am interested in her name changes. I recognize in myself, as I try to name her, I struggle. And so I wonder, why is that? Why can't I just call her Hulga as she claims to want? Or call her Joy, which is used more in this story? And I'm realizing that I find a complication there. I find something with tension in her name itself. So I go through the story and I begin collecting the pieces of evidence that are connected to that interesting idea. This quote, she had arrived at it, her name, first, purely on the basis of its ugly sound, and then the full genius of its fitness had struck her. Interesting. So in that, I didn't write this exactly, but in that moment in my mind, I thought, so she chose her name because it sounded ugly to her. Wow. That seems like a strange reason. And then her mother says this, or sort of thinks this. She was certain that Hulga had thought and thought until she had hit upon the ugliest name in any language. And I'm struck by the fact that they're actually thinking along the same lines. So in the very moment that they claim to be in conflict with one another, they actually have the same idea. If they were able to give voice to these thoughts, Mrs. Hopewell would say, you just picked it because it's ugly. And Hulga would say, that's right. But of course, they don't communicate that clearly and honestly. But I was struck there by the agreement. And I wrote that. They agree. And I think that's interesting because there's something else going on there. Joy chooses Hulga partly to distance herself from her mother, to say, I don't agree with you, Mom. I'm going to be my own woman. And her mom thinks that same thing about herself. Her mom is superior and believes that she is her own, set apart from everybody else, and better than everybody else. And as her mother says early in the story, she has no bad qualities of her own. So they both have this superiority complex. But Mrs. Freeman's relish, so I'm not going to bring in Mrs. Freeman too much, but I think it's interesting. Her relish for using the name Hulga only irritated Hulga. It was as if Mrs. Freeman had penetrated far enough beyond her face to reach some secret fact. So it seems that the Joy Hulga connection to the name, it is something she owns really tightly, and it's something she doesn't want people to know much about. So all of that I find to be really interesting. How is she constructing this identity on a name that she doesn't really feel too connected to? It's a superficial connection, and she doesn't want anyone to really know why she has it. All of that suggests to me that the identity she is constructing, it is lacking in foundation. I don't think she really knows what she wants. And so I find it really interesting when she meets Manly Pointer that she abandons the name. From the moment she meets up with Manly Pointer, the only time that her name is used is when he uses it. The narrator calls her the girl. I find that fascinating. And I think what's happening is she has not constructed a strong identity. So when she meets this man who completely changes the way she thinks about things, she loses even the identity she has constructed. Okay, how do I get all of that in a paragraph? I'm not going to be able to do everything, and that's okay. This is just a paragraph, but eventually it will be an essay. So here's my claim. In Flannery O'Connor's Good Country People, which is a good way to start your claims if you can, to start that practice, Joy Hulga tries to change on her own, but because the attempted change was superficial only, she fails to transform and instead proves that she has no identity of her own. All right, so I have a lot to prove. I have to prove that the attempted change was superficial and that she fails to transform. So I'm taking up that idea of does she change or not change, and I'm choosing a really specific avenue to address the question. So here's the beginning of my analysis. So I've got my claim, and then I begin to explain. So I ask the question, why do I think that? I say as soon as she's able, she changes her name to Hulga. But it's an act of childlike defiance and not of real deep-seated growth. Why do I say that? Because of my evidence. Indeed, she chooses the name at first on the basis of its ugly sound, which proves that even her mother, who understands so little, sees through her attempted change, certain that Hulga had thought and thought until she had hit upon the ugliest name in any language. I have to explain myself a little bit. In this way, both daughter and mother agree in the very act of rejecting each other. All right, so I've explained a little bit of my first point, that the name is superficial when she chooses it. And it's going to have these consequences. Because she chooses it for a superficial reason and not a really good reason that's deep felt, it's going to actually connect her more to the thing she's trying to escape. So I have to explain that a little more. I feel like I've only begun to touch on it. I'm going to add this idea. It's in red at the bottom. Hulga's name is a secret fact, a personal affair, and a matter of intense personal pride, representing her superiority over others, especially her mother. Ironically, this kind of thinking is exactly what defines her mother, who in her own thinking has no bad qualities of her own. So I'm trying to connect to my one example, they both agree that the name is ugly. They don't know they agree. To this larger idea of why does that matter? Hulga thinks that she's better than everybody else. It's exactly what her mother thinks, that she, her mother, is better than everybody else. So they're the same. I have more to say, though. I want to get at this idea that when push comes to shove, something that thin will fall away. And so I'm going to end my paragraph by saying, when Joy's constructed self-image is stripped to its core by Manly Pointer, the story drops her names completely, calling her only the girl. She has already disowned her identity as Joy, and there is no strength to the name she has chosen. It falls away as soon as it is in the hands of Manly Pointer, who reveals the lie it contains. So what I have here is a paragraph that I can imagine becomes an essay. I don't need to do that today, and I'm not asking you to do it. But I'm trying to build my idea so I can naturally see the next paragraph would be all about Manly Pointer and the way that she is called the girl. I have a lot to say about that, and I'm just now beginning to build to get to that idea. So in summary, as I go through writing this paragraph, these are the 2 steps I take. First, I plan. I go through my evidence looking for ideas. And once I feel I have those, I gather them together and I create my claim. This is what the lecture was about last week. Pinning those micro ideas together until you have that large idea. But then in the act of writing, I have to go backwards. I start with my claim, and then I move through my ideas and I break them down into pieces. I'm trying to find different kinds of ideas there too, not just the same thing reinforced again and again and again, but layers of the idea. And in order to do that, I have to present my evidence. Right, so that is your task. I look forward to reading your paragraphs. Just a reminder, please write them in your big Google Doc and then just copy and paste them over to our discussion board so that we can see each other's. Thank you very much, and let me know via email if you have questions.